Right, the next one we look at is Black Jack Brabham. Now, this was an interview you did with Jack in Australia before the Grand Prix, Anthony, and you went up to Brisbane to see him, didn't you?
Yeah, we went up to the Gold Coast, yeah. That was a really cool experience, actually, because he's not someone I expected ever to interview at all. You know, he's an old guy now, he's 87. But we figured, I had a contact for his wife, Lady Margaret Brabham, and a couple of months before the Grand Prix, I figured, why not just see if he's available for an interview and do it on our way down, because you don't go to Australia very often, or at least I don't, go once a year at best. And they said yes, delighted, and it was great just to interview him at his home in a sort of big gated development backing onto a golf course. And he's pretty frail, but I was briefed before by Mark Webber, among other people, to just get him talking about the racing, and once you do, and the old cogs start turning, it's fabulous to hear him talking about, you know, Repco and Cooper, which based just down the road here in Surbiton, and all this stuff. It's just a different world, and you cannot imagine that Formula One happened like that when you see the way it is now. It's impossible to relate one to the other. Yet the existence of someone like Jack proves that it is still interconnected. He was there, and he's still alive watching Formula One now. He was at the Grand Prix a couple of days later. So there is this sort of golden thread that links the old days with the current sport. And, you know, Jack's one of those guys who survived. There aren't many of them left. He's the oldest world champion surviving now, isn't he?
Yeah, and as Rob said when we were talking about Denny Hulme, after that win at Aintree, maybe he can afford some shoes, because he started racing with no shoes, working in the Brabham factory over in Byfleet. And not so long ago, actually, not far from here in Chessington, I drove down, I think it's Ewell Road, where Jack's Esso garage was. And the garage is still there. It's no longer Esso, it's something else. But I took some pictures of it. And it's just on the corner. And it's where Phil Kerr and Jack set up that. And it's where, I mean, they did all these great things. There was the Brabham Viva, Vauxhall Viva, with Brabham tuning on it. And you got the little Brabham logo on the back of the car. I loved all those details. And then in the 60s, all the drivers started to do their own version of leather driving gloves. And of course, Jack's were kangaroo skin, and they were very nice, dark green leather, I remember. And so what was his house like, actually? Did he have a lot of trophies and photographs in there?
Not much. Not much. There's a little glass replica of the BT20 on his sort of coffee table in front of the sofas in the lounge, which we pictured. Various little bits of memorabilia. There's one nice certificate in which he's called a living national treasure, which is just awarded to by Australia, which is quite cool. And there's a Michael Turner painting of the 1960 French Grand Prix with Jack racing against Von Trips and Phil Hill, which he talked about as being the most exciting race he ever raced. And he really got quite emotional about that, saying, it's great to be the Ferraris and all that kind of stuff. And it was, I always find it...
Talk about that, they were the days when they ran as close racing, I mean, that's what... Well, the slipstream racing was just ridiculous, but it was wonderful.
But you can hardly believe that the guy you're talking to is the guy in the cockpit. It seems like so long ago. And it reminds me of when I used to be a local newspaper reporter, and you'd talk to war veterans about D-Day landings or flying air cover for the D-Day landings. You think, wow, these guys were flying Typhoons into, you know, anti-aircraft guns, and that's what they did. And they're here talking to you about it now.
And this is actually the person that sat in that seat and held that.
It's a real thing that they're
joystick.
talking about, and it's quite hard to associate this sort of frail, fading man with someone who raced so hard in such dangerous conditions.
I know exactly what you mean. There's a lovely photograph, well, many lovely photographs, and that shot of Jack leading Phil Hill at Monaco. He's actually in the Lotus 24 there, and it's really interesting to see that, because that was Jack's choice of car while he was still building his own, finishing. He'd left Cooper's, and he was building up his own Brabham, obviously, and he bought a Lotus from Colin Chapman. And it's the result of that was that the following year, Jack had a lack of engines. He kept blowing up the Climax flat crank engine at the beginning of '63. And they only had one car, which Dan Gurney raced in the Monaco Grand Prix. And literally, after practice, Colin Chapman said, "Would you like to race our third Lotus 25 the next day, Jack?" And he said, "Yeah, okay." And that, if you think about that, I mean, that's like, and if we had three cars, if we had two cars and a spare, that would be like Red Bull saying to Lewis Hamilton, "Would you like to run our third car? Shame you damaged your car yesterday. Drive our car on Sunday." Wouldn't it be wonderful if they did that?
Amazing.
It'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? So Jack raced a Lotus at Monaco 2 years in a row. But wonderful cars, and what a great guy.